Some killers knock on doors. These dialed first. They used voices, not weapons, to lure, confuse, or comfort. Each call sounded routine, a job offer, a warning, a family update. But once the phone went silent, someone was already dying. Before I tell you how these 7 killers used a single phone call to trap their victims, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. And don't forget to subscribe, because in these stories, the last thing the victims heard was someone saying their name. He didn't need to chase them. All he needed was a landline and a calm Southern voice. Between 1993 and 1995, 5 women across Oregon vanished after receiving a phone call they believed came from the sheriff's department. The man on the other end said he was Deputy Travis Norrick, the sheriff's nephew. He claimed their license plates had been flagged, that a citation had been mailed, and that failure to appear would result in a bench warrant. Each call came after dark. Each woman lived alone, and each agreed to come down just to clear it up. The voice was always calm, polite, apologetic even. "We just need to do a quick check in person. No big deal, miss." But Travis Norrick didn't exist. The sheriff had no nephew, and the call didn't come from the department at all. Investigators would later learn that the phone number had been spoofed using early radio tech rerouted through a decommissioned dispatcher's car bought at a state auction. And the man making the calls, whose real name remains redacted in public records to this day, had been kicked out of a police academy for impersonation and mental instability. He had spent years studying police procedure, memorizing call scripts, and copying interrogation tones. He even bought an old patrol jacket from a surplus store and stitched his own patch. What made his method lethal wasn't the violence, it was the patience. Each woman was told to park behind a shuttered DMV office where the paperwork could be handled privately. When they arrived, they were met by a man in uniform with a clipboard and an empty manila folder. He would flash a fake badge, ask for ID, then politely suggest they sit in the back seat of his cruiser so the cameras could see everything was above board. And they did. That's how much trust he commanded. Once inside, he activated the child locks. That was the last time they were seen alive. The real police didn't connect the dots until the 5th victim, a nurse named Celia Park, was found dead in a drainage basin outside Eugene. Her wrists had been zip-tied. Her blouse was buttoned neatly. No sign of struggle, no sign of robbery, just a single cassette tape left beside her body. On it, a voicemail she'd left her sister minutes before the meeting. "He says it's nothing," she whispered. "Just paperwork. I'll call you in 15. She never did. And when they traced the call, it bounced off 2 inactive towers, both linked to auctioned-out vehicles that had since disappeared. It was a dead trail, until a break came from an unlikely source. A retired radio technician who recognized the call distortions from a local ham radio club. He reported a man named Clay Devins, a former member who had once bragged about rerouting police chatter just for kicks. When police raided Devins' cabin outside Bend, they found a box of sheriff's department patches, a list of women's names next to license plate numbers, and a makeshift wall covered in DMV printouts, court stamps, and stationery. They also found a grave. One of the missing victims, 18-year-old Tanya Wells, was buried beneath his shed, still wearing her seatbelt. Devins never confessed. He claimed the badge gave him authority, that he never hurt anyone who didn't disobey. But all 5 victims had followed instructions. Each had complied, each had trusted the voice, and each had vanished. The media dubbed him the sheriff's nephew, though he never truly worked in law enforcement. He'd only studied it, copied it, became it. He's currently serving 5 consecutive life sentences with no chance of parole. But one chilling detail still haunts the case. Each victim's final voicemail, later retrieved from answering machines, ends with the same phrase spoken softly in the background. "Please stay calm, ma'am. It'll all be over soon." Once Clay Devins was in custody, investigators faced an unexpected obstacle. There was no physical evidence linking him to 3 of the 5 known victims. No DNA, no fingerprints, not even tire tracks. Just a string of missing women and a twisted digital breadcrumb trail of call logs, audio snippets, and a meticulous wall of impersonation materials. What built the case wasn't what Clay left behind, it was what he took. Every woman's car had vanished. Their personal items, wallets, phones, jewelry, never resurfaced. Yet in Devon's home, hidden behind an acoustic tile in the ceiling, police found a wooden box labeled Compliance. Inside were hand-drawn diagrams of a DMV office, photocopied license renewal letters, lists of shift rotations from local precincts, and his most disturbing keepsakes, a collection of voice practice cassettes, each labeled with phrases like calm tone, firm instruction, and escalation if questioned. One tape contained dozens of recordings of Devons rehearsing the same line over and over. "Ma'am, this isn't a formal arrest. I just need your cooperation." It wasn't rage that powered him, it was rehearsal. The prosecution's case hinged on his obsessive preparation. In court, the defense tried to argue mental instability, citing a childhood incident where Devons had been locked in a closet by a stepfather impersonating a sheriff himself. But the jury didn't see trauma. They saw calculation. They saw a man who bought retired cop cars and filed the serial numbers off, who sewed his own patches, called from police spoof lines, and buried his victims in uniformed silence. Even more haunting, an autopsy of Tanya Wells revealed a shocking detail. She had not been sexually assaulted, no sign of struggle, no poison. Cause of death: asphyxiation from zip ties left in place for over an hour. Medical examiners concluded she had slowly suffocated, gagged but conscious, left to die in what Devons called restraint mode. There was no frenzy, no panic, just protocol. His motive, prosecutors argued, was rooted in a warped sense of control, not just over bodies, but belief systems. Devons wanted to be trusted, respected, obeyed. Each time he called a new victim, he was testing whether the illusion still worked, whether authority alone could disarm a stranger. The final woman, Celia Park, almost broke the cycle. Her sister told police that Celia felt uneasy, but went anyway, saying, "He sounds too real." That call, which left behind the now infamous "I'll call you in 15, was the final crack in Devon's method. It triggered the investigation that brought him down. In prison, Devons has refused all interviews. The warden describes him as eerily compliant, never speaking out of turn, and often reciting policies back to guards before they give instructions. One officer claimed Devons corrected him on restraint protocol during a training session, quoting policy from memory. He's since been placed in solitary confinement, not for violence, but for observing other inmates too closely. The cell next to him remains empty by administrative order. Devons is serving his sentence at Oregon State Penitentiary, where he has no visitors, no media access, and no recorded disciplinary issues. But according to internal logs, he continues to write in a spiral-bound notebook titled Next Shift. A psychological evaluation last year noted one chilling phrase written over and over on its final page: badge, voice, trust, entry, remove. It reads like a checklist, a protocol, and no one can say with certainty whether he ever planned to stop. Because for Clay Devons, the hunt didn't begin in a dark alley. It began with a phone ringing and a voice that sounded just like someone you were supposed to trust. Clay Devons used a badge to earn obedience. He banked on fear, the kind of fear that stops people from asking questions. But the next killer didn't need fear. He used something softer. He whispered opportunity. Because in his world, it wasn't sirens that lured the victims. It was the sound of hope ringing through a phone. In a city built on dreams, it only took one phone call to turn ambition into a death sentence. Between 2007 and 2011, 7 aspiring actresses, models, and dancers vanished in the greater Los Angeles area, each after receiving the same call. A smooth male voice, claiming to be from a boutique casting agency affiliated with a known production house, offered them a private audition opportunity for a low-pressure test shoot at a downtown studio. The victims ranged in age from 17 to 29, and most had small online profiles, portfolios on casting websites, short demo reels on YouTube, or local modeling gigs listed publicly. That was the pattern. That's how the killer found them. He never used the same agency name twice, but always the same phrase. "You're being considered for something real. This could be your break." He claimed to be in between projects and offered to walk them through a few lines or poses, just to see if the vibe fit. The voice never pushed. It flattered. It sounded young, knowledgeable, insider. The location provided was always a nondescript space in a repurposed warehouse district, accessible, rented under disposable shell LLCs, paid in cash. Once the women arrived, there were no camera crews, no assistants, just a room with blackout curtains, a folding table, a space heater, and a clipboard with blank forms. Some of the women left voicemails on the way. "He sounds legit. This place is weird, but maybe it's just indie. If it sucks, I'll be out in 30. But none of them walked out, not even once. The bodies didn't surface until late 2011, when construction workers gutting an abandoned soundstage uncovered a false wall filled with insulation and sealed black garbage bags. Inside, 6 decomposed bodies, each wrapped in heavy-duty sheeting, faces covered with theater masks, mouths taped shut. A 7th bag was empty, except for a camera lens and a single black glove. The LAPD initially thought they were dealing with a serial studio rapist or underground filmmaker, but none of the women showed signs of recording. There were no tapes, no footage, no cameras. Just posed bodies, identical positioning, and one identical cause of death: fatal IV injection of ketamine and rocuronium, a combination used in surgical anesthesia and lethal injection protocols. This was no botched attempt at filming. This was clinical, silent, almost theatrical. The media called him the talent scout. But behind the name was a method so sophisticated, investigators had no clear leads. The disposable phone used for contact was traced to a prepaid SIM activated on a rainy Tuesday at a gas station miles from any victim. The signature voice was never identified, and the studio spaces were rented under names that led nowhere. What gave police their first real break wasn't forensic, it was a mistake in psychology. On one victim's laptop, found in her apartment weeks later, they discovered a recorded Zoom meeting she'd had with friends just days before disappearing. In it, she described the call. He said he used to work on Veronica Mars, even dropped Kristen Bell's name. Investigators followed that line, uncovering casting staff from the early 2000s era, and found something chilling. A man named Marcus Fee, name withheld by order of ongoing litigation, had worked briefly as an unpaid casting assistant on a CW set. He was fired for inappropriate behavior. His name had never made it to official credits, but for 1 week, he had access to scripts, jargon, and most importantly, the tone. When they raided his apartment in 2012, they found a shelf filled with theater masks, multiple burner phones, and documents showing that he'd attended a paramedical training course for administering IV drugs, but never completed certification. He was gone. The apartment was empty, dust-covered, rent unpaid for 2 months, no fingerprints, no hair, nothing. Just one final thing left on the kitchen counter: a white calling card with no number, just the words, "You've been seen." What haunted detectives wasn't just how the talent scout lured them, it was how carefully he erased himself afterward. The warehouse wall had been professionally sealed. The insulation surrounding the bodies was designed to suppress odor and decay, the kind used in soundproofed recording studios. The plastic sheeting showed no fingerprints, but tests confirmed surgical-grade latex had been used during the wrapping process. Whoever did this didn't panic. He prepped. Even more disturbing, investigators found faint traces of theatrical stage makeup on the wrists and necks of two victims, suggesting they had been redressed or repositioned after death. The absence of bruising, defense wounds, or visible trauma confirmed that the victims were immobilized and killed quietly, likely while conscious but chemically paralyzed. The drugs, ketamine and rocuronium, required precise dosing, and their acquisition left no trace in local pharmacies. Toxicologists confirmed the killer had enough pharmacological knowledge to avoid overdose alarms. They suspected he sourced the compounds through black market veterinary suppliers or educational labs, but none of the leads tracked back to anyone named Marcus. Then came the voicemail. In 2013, a young woman named Erica Stiles received a call from an unknown number offering an invitation to a private screen test for a festival project. The voice gave a name and a location, this time a converted art studio in Pasadena. Erica, shaken by the similarities to the talent scout profile, recorded the call and turned it over to police. Audio analysis confirmed it was the same voice, soft, mid-30s male, trained diction, slight inflection drop at the end of offers. But Erica never went. She posted the voice clip online. The clip went viral. For the first time, the killer's voice was public. Within days, dozens of women came forward, claiming they'd received similar calls, some dating back nearly a decade. One woman from San Diego said she'd attended a test shoot but had a bad feeling and left when no one else showed up. She described the room exactly: folding chair, space heater, blank forms, blackout curtains. She had no proof, just her memory, but it was enough to give the LAPD a pattern. Still, they couldn't find Marcus. He had no living family, no credit history, no taxes filed since 2009. When they traced his original apartment lease, they found it had been co-signed by a woman named Marissa Vale, a former community college drama teacher who had vanished in 2005 after calling in sick and never returning. When they searched her last known residence, it had already been bulldozed and turned into a parking lot. Her body has never been found, but her dental records matched one of the missing jaw bones found in the studio wall, meaning Marcus may have begun his spree far earlier than first believed. The seventh empty bag? Possibly hers, possibly a warning. The talent scout was never formally charged, never found, and never directly seen. His voice, calm, encouraging, friendly, remains his only signature. Today, acting schools in Los Angeles use the voicemail as a training exercise in safety seminars. It's played in full, no names, no threats, just a man saying, "Bring your best self." I really think this could be the one. It ends with a click and silence. The talent scout gave hope a voice. He spoke in compliments and callbacks, pulling victims in with the promise of being seen. But not every killer pretended to make you famous. Some pretended to protect you. And the next one? She didn't offer auditions or scripts. She offered help, the kind that comes when you're most afraid and most alone. She never needed to scream. Her weapon was comfort. Between 1998 and 2004, 11 runaway teens and transient women went missing in the Pacific Northwest. All of them reported to have made one final phone call, not to a family member, not to a friend, but to a women's shelter in Portland that for years hadn't officially existed. The number was passed around in cigarette-scented whispers, on tear-stained flyers, in back-alley conversations between those who didn't trust police. The script was always the same. If you're in danger, if you need out, if you're alone, call here. They'll pick you up, no questions. The line was always answered by a woman, soft-spoken, gentle. "Hi, this is Rachel. Are you safe right now?" She sounded like every high school counselor you almost trusted. She promised transportation, a warm bed, a detox option if needed, and zero judgment. She didn't rush. She didn't threaten. She sounded like someone who had been there. That's what made her so perfect. According to one surviving witness, a girl who jumped out of a moving van and shattered her wrist in 2003, the process was fast. She said she was sending a car, that it might not look like a real shuttle, but to trust the driver. She said she'd be there at the house, waiting. The girl had given an address in the suburbs where she'd been squatting. 30 minutes later, an unmarked white panel van arrived. Inside, a woman sat behind the wheel. Dark hair, early 40s, no makeup, thick Oregon accent. She didn't introduce herself. She just said, "You made the right call." As they drove, the woman offered her water and asked her if she'd ever thought about her future. "Do you like gardening?" she asked. "Some of the girls here do garden therapy, real peaceful." But 5 minutes outside Portland, the driver turned onto a logging road. That's when the girl got suspicious. I asked why we weren't going into the city, and she said the shelter moved. Less noise, less attention. When she reached for her phone, the woman locked the doors. Then she said something I'll never forget. "Don't ruin this. This is better than what you had." The girl panicked, undid her seatbelt, and flung herself out the back as the van slowed to round a ditch. She survived, barely, but she never got a license plate. She couldn't remember the woman's last name, and by the time she returned with police, the van was gone. A burned patch of brush was all that remained, along with a single gardening glove and the melted remnants of a medical cooler. When police traced the phone number she'd called, they found it was registered to a pay-as-you-go burner, purchased with cash at a Rite Aid 4 years earlier. The number had routed through forwarding systems, fake nonprofits, spoofed shelter addresses, and disconnected buildings. The Rachel identity didn't exist in any system. No Rachel had ever worked in those counties under DV services, rehab, or youth programs. But the call logs showed a pattern. Victims had reached out within 24 hours of their disappearance, often after domestic disputes, shelter evictions, or police encounters. Their final outgoing call, always the same number. The bodies didn't appear until 2005, when a rainstorm uncovered a shallow grave off the 214 highway. Inside were the remains of 5 women, arranged in a circle, each wearing identical gardening gloves and layered in moss and pine needles. Tests revealed they'd been poisoned, a high dose of belladonna mixed with alcohol and injected intravenously. No signs of restraint, no bruises. Only puncture marks, soil residue, and faint traces of lavender oil. The media dubbed the case the Moss Widow. What made it worse? In each corpse's pocket they found a neatly folded pamphlet, not printed, handwritten, a single sheet titled, "How to Start Over." It began with one line, "Call when you're ready. You'll be planted somewhere quiet." Even after the bodies were found and the local news turned the Moss Widow into headline horror, the phone line didn't stop ringing. Detectives left it active, hoping to trace new calls or trap the operator. But no new voice ever answered. Instead, they began receiving voicemails, short, distorted, never longer than 10 seconds. In one, a woman said, "You can't stop growth. It finds its way." In another, "The soil remembers who it fed." The voice was always low, spoken slowly and close to the mic, like someone was speaking while crouching in a closet. When the recordings were analyzed by sound engineers, the background audio revealed clues, soft clinking like glass bottles, the flutter of window blinds, one time even a faint echo of a public service announcement about hydration that only aired inside county bus shelters. That meant the killer had been recording voicemails inside transit systems, while passengers walked by. She was hiding in plain sight. A review of county footage from shelters and buses identified one recurring figure: a middle-aged woman with short gray hair, thrift store clothing, and a canvas tote bag covered in botanical patches. In one clip, she was seen helping a limping girl to a bench, whispering something in her ear, and disappearing just before police arrived. No identification, no plate. But the footage matched the surviving victim's original description. The footage became the center of a multi-agency manhunt. Still, she was never caught. What the investigators did find, however, was a cabin. Deep in a state forest reserve just outside of Eugene, rangers found a collapsed shack after a wildfire. Beneath the ruins, they discovered rusted gardening tools, a rain barrel filled with pale soil, and a hidden compartment in the floor containing sealed envelopes. Inside were letters, all addressed to first names only: Amber, Jess, Nora, Becky. The messages were written in blue ink, each no longer than a paragraph. But the handwriting matched the "How to Start Over" flyers. One read, "The place you were in tried to bury you. I only helped you bloom somewhere else." Another, "This isn't a crime. It's a transplant. We don't leave bruises here." Forensics also recovered fragments of clothing with bleach traces, spent syringes, and burned receipts. None legible. But the cabin contained no electrical wiring, no plumbing, and no evidence of long-term habitation. Just a journal buried inside the rain barrel, wrapped in wax paper. Most pages were ruined by water, but one sentence survived near the front. "People call 911 when they want to be saved. But what do they call when they want to disappear?" The final known trace of the shelter worker came in 2007. A runaway hotline center in Boise received a voicemail from an older woman offering to help set up safe transports for girls in need. She used the name Rachel. The staff traced the call to a disconnected landline in a library basement. No one had used the room in months. The tape was sent to Portland PD, voice match, 94% certainty. But the case was already cold, and with no confirmed sighting since, the shelter worker has joined the ranks of urban legend. Some claim she was a rogue therapist. Others believe she was a failed foster parent who snapped. But one thing remains: the voicemail line still exists, still active. And occasionally, according to underground survivor forums, it still rings and still gets picked up by a woman who whispers, "Are you somewhere safe right now?" She pretended to rescue people, but she was always burying them. The shelter worker weaponized safety, using empathy like anesthesia before the final cut. But the next killer didn't offer escape. He offered answers, the kind that come when you're desperate to understand what went wrong. His calls didn't offer hope, they offered closure. And by the time his victims realized what he really was, they were already lying down to listen. He called after funerals, always. Between 2011 and 2016, a string of women in Texas lost their husbands in sudden tragic accidents. Car crashes, construction site falls, overdoses. Within days of the burial, each widow received a phone call. The voice on the line was soft, male, Southern accent, never rushed. "Hi, this is Joseph. I'm part of the aftercare outreach program here at the hospital. Just checking in to see if you've had a chance to talk to anyone since the loss." He never pushed. He listened. He let silence stretch until the women filled it. His specialty was the pause, the kind that cracks people open. He offered resources, grief sessions, journaling kits, support circles. But for select women, the ones whose voices trembled or who admitted they were alone, he offered something more private. "Sometimes group spaces aren't safe for real grief," he'd say. "I run one-on-one sessions for survivors who feel like they're drowning." And in every case, the women agreed. The first two women were never connected. One was 38, the other 62. One lived in Austin, the other in Tyler. They disappeared on different days from different counties, but both had told friends they were meeting with someone from the hospital outreach team the day they vanished. Both had left handwritten notes with the same phrase, "This might be the first day I feel heard." Their bodies weren't found until 2014, buried beneath limestone slabs outside a rural storage facility Joseph had once worked at under an alias. They were both clothed in hospital gowns, but there were no signs of restraint. Only traces of midazolam and propofol in their bloodstream, common surgical sedatives used to knock people out painlessly. Their phones had been wiped, their call histories deleted, but cell tower pings showed them both near the same off-the-map building 3 hours apart, 2 years apart. The forensic pattern didn't emerge until victim number 5. She had shared a voicemail with her daughter, one she described as the first kind voice I've heard since he died. The recording was only 8 seconds. "You don't need to talk right now. Just breathe. I'll help carry this with you." Police traced the number. It led to a hospice facility in Dallas. But no Joseph worked there, and the extension wasn't real. They checked caller ID systems and traced it again, this time to a burner number purchased at a truck stop outside Amarillo. Surveillance footage was long erased, but the phone had been used dozens of times in surrounding counties to contact women who had all recently lost spouses. Joseph was a grief scavenger. He stalked obituaries like dating profiles, built emotional maps from news reports and funeral notices, but he didn't kill immediately. He waited, observed. Sometimes he called 2 weeks after the death, sometimes 2 months. Sometimes he showed up unannounced, with pamphlets, a clipboard, even an ID badge with a hospital logo he printed himself. His victims never screamed. Toxicology showed they were sedated gently. No trauma, no fight, no alarms, only smooth chemical silence. He buried them all differently. One behind a veterinary clinic, one beneath a horse paddock, one inside a decommissioned septic tank. But he always left one thing with them, a copy of the Grief Recovery Handbook, folded open to the same page. Chapter 3. What if the person you lost wasn't good to you? And tucked inside, handwritten notes. You're allowed to rest now. This doesn't make you weak. He didn't deserve your best years. Police believed these weren't just comfort notes. They were keys, clues to the way he selected his victims. Women who had loved men that didn't love them back. Women who blamed themselves for staying too long. Joseph didn't think he was killing. He thought he was offering mercy, and worse, he believed they were asking for it. After 5 bodies and nearly a dozen vanishing widows, investigators finally had a thread, but it unraveled faster than they could follow it. Joseph was never his real name. Every call came from a burner. Every hospital badge was fake. But the turning point came in 2016, when a suspicious hospice nurse in San Antonio flagged a man waiting in the lobby. He wasn't on any patient's visitor list, said he was just waiting to drop off support materials for a client's sister. When security arrived, he was already gone. But the nurse remembered his clipboard, said it was full of pamphlets with a green flower on them, a design the facility hadn't used in over a decade. A week later, the same flower logo showed up on a grief handbook mailed anonymously to a grieving woman in Houston, but this time, inside the book was a USB drive. The drive contained audio files, 17 of them, all short, all named with women's first names: Darla.wav, Monique.wav, Paula.wav. Each file was a voicemail, quiet, spoken slowly, always the same voice. In one, he says, "I've seen what it looks like to carry pain that long. You don't have to anymore." Another, "Nobody needs you to perform anymore. You're not broken, they just never listened." The audio files were sent to behavioral analysts who concluded the man used therapeutic mirroring, a technique taught in grief counseling, to break down resistance. But his tone was different, almost messianic, like he believed he was delivering salvation. When police traced the USB's envelope, they found a matching print on the inside flap, partial thumb, worn smooth, consistent with someone who'd worked in manual labor or medical sterilization. A breakthrough came when a woman named Eleanor was reported missing by her sister. Eleanor had recently lost her abusive husband to cancer. Before vanishing, she had told her sister that someone from a support circle outreach had left her a voicemail. When they pulled her call records, they found one number that stood out, a burner used for less than 48 hours. It pinged cell towers near an abandoned hospice clinic that had burned down in 2009. When agents explored the ruins, they found a hidden crawl space below what used to be the grief counseling room. Inside were 6 name tags, all read Joseph, all with different faces, all printed on the same low-resolution template. Near the corner, investigators found an industrial cooler. Inside were sealed vials of expired propofol, stolen from a nearby hospital during a reported theft years prior. Along with them, a box of note cards, each with 2 columns, observed and accepted. Under observed, names of women who had lost husbands, dates, quotes overheard or gathered from obituaries and online memorial pages. Under accepted, far fewer names, but all matched victims now confirmed dead. Joseph was selecting, filtering, watching. But the biggest shock came from a wall behind the cooler, covered in pages from grief books, each underlined with red pen, annotated with chilling notes. They don't want life, they want release. Pain becomes identity. I only untie it. Consent isn't always verbal. The FBI created a profile, former nurse or therapist, male, likely 40s to 50s, with advanced knowledge of sedatives, behavioral patterns, and public record systems. Someone who blended in, someone who worked behind curtains, but he never resurfaced. Even the voicemails stopped. The last recording came in September 2016. In it, a woman's voice says, "You promised me peace," and a man responds, "This is it." To this day, Joseph, or whatever his real name is, has never been found. Some believe he burned with the clinic. Others believe he's still listening, watching the obituaries, waiting for another heart cracked wide open. Because in his mind, death was never the end. It was the service. He didn't chase blood, he chased sorrow. Joseph studied pain the way surgeons study anatomy, cold, clinical, precise. But the next killer didn't wait for grief. He created it. One phone call, one lie, and a family would spiral into panic. Because this one didn't sound kind, he sounded urgent. And once he had their fear on the line, he never let go. Between 2004 and 2009, a series of disappearances plagued 3 counties in rural Ohio. All women, all middle-aged, all last seen at home. No break-ins, no struggle, just gone. What connected them was chilling and nearly invisible. Each had received a phone call shortly before vanishing, a call that in every case mimicked a 911 emergency follow-up. The voice was male, calm, official. "This is Officer Miller with County Dispatch. We have reason to believe someone may be trying to access your property. You'll be receiving a home safety check within the next hour. Please remain inside and wait by the door." That was it. No badge numbers, no callback line, just enough to sound real. In the early cases, families assumed these women had left voluntarily. One husband told police his wife had been acting off after the call, paranoid, pacing, waiting for someone who never arrived. She'd changed clothes and even reapplied makeup, which made no sense. Then she stepped outside and never came back. It wasn't until the 4th woman, 51-year-old Denise Talbot, that investigators realized the calls weren't coming from dispatch at all. Denise had been home alone when she got the call, but her sister had been on speakerphone at the time. She heard the man clearly. "We're just doing a safety pass, ma'am. Please stay put." When Denise's body was found weeks later, buried in plastic beneath a barn crawl space, the message took on a different meaning. A phone dump revealed the call had come from a masked VoIP number bouncing through public Wi-Fi sources. The killer had spoofed the call to appear as if it came from county services. Worse, the phone used to place it had only ever dialed 3 numbers, all matching the prior victims. FBI agents traced the device to an electronics recycling warehouse in Toledo, but the serial number had been filed off. Over time, more details came to light. Each woman had been called between 5:30 and 6:15 p.m., a window matching the shift end for most local law enforcement. The caller knew routines, knew dinner times, husband work schedules, and when certain neighborhoods fell quiet. He timed his calls around local emergency alerts, often placing them during tornado drills or false fire reports. He wanted to blend in. One victim's neighbor saw a man in a yellow reflective vest knock on the door the same night she vanished. But no such visit was ever logged, and the woman's doorbell camera disconnected 5 minutes before the knock. Later, a partial shoe print was found, non-slip tread, typical of custodial or EMT footwear. The killer had a uniform, had a voice, had an entire system, and once the victim opened the door, there were no signs of violence, no screams, just the hum of trust, exploited in silence. One recovered voicemail played for detectives featured a voice that said, "You're not in trouble. We just need to verify you're safe. I'll be there shortly." They now believe he sometimes called twice, once to warn, once to calm. This was a killer who manipulated fear and comfort in equal measure. His weapon wasn't force, it was routine. What made the emergency dispatcher so terrifying wasn't just his planning, it was how close he sat to reality. By the time Task Force Echo was assembled, they'd mapped 6 confirmed victims across 3 counties and suspected up to 9. The killer's profile: a male, mid-30s to 50s, with deep knowledge of police language, dispatch structure, and public fear patterns. They suspected he once worked in or adjacent to first response, possibly a former trainee, volunteer firefighter, or hospital intake clerk. Then came the break. In 2008, a woman named Valerie Stokes didn't open her door. She listened to the same type of voicemail, soft male voice. "This is Officer Reynolds from County Dispatch. Please stay inside." But Valerie had a police scanner. Her late husband had been a deputy. She knew the lingo, and the voice said Unit Code 17 instead of 17 Unit, which tipped her off. She recorded the voicemail and gave it to police. Audio forensics uncovered a subtle loop in the background, a chirping sound, repeating every 37 seconds. Eventually, they matched it to a faulty smoke detector at a rural post office that had recently been converted into private storage units. When agents raided the facility, they found something almost cinematic, a single unit converted into a fake dispatch room. Inside, a rolling chair, a used laptop with VoIP software, local PD cheat sheets, reflective vests, body spray, gloves, burner phones, and a small cooler with wipes and vials of injectable midazolam, a medical-grade sedative that can render a person unconscious in minutes. But no prints, no DNA, no name. The unit had been rented under the alias Howard Beale, a reference to a fictional news anchor who famously said, "I'm mad as hell." Investigators believe the killer had a grudge against the emergency system, possibly rejected from training or fired after probation. But then came the twist. Police ran a bulk test on all outgoing calls made from the fake dispatch line. One of them, dated June 7, 2007, had not gone to a victim. It had gone to a corrections officer named Len Mendez. He'd received a voicemail asking if he had any open leads for suspicious persons, phrased in a way that made no sense. Mendez ignored it, but 5 days later, his cousin's wife disappeared. She lived 2 towns over. That was the link. The killer wasn't calling strangers. He was targeting people tied to law enforcement, loosely, distantly but emotionally. Widows of retired cops, daughters of firemen, sisters of EMTs. It was revenge wrapped in simulation. He was making the system chase its own ghost. The final message came in early 2009. A woman named Gloria Benton had worked as a 911 operator for 27 years before retiring. She got the call at 5:42 p.m. "This is a courtesy check-in," the voice said. "You served your time. We just want to make sure you're safe tonight." Gloria recorded the call. The voice ended with, "You know how this works." And that was it. Gloria disappeared the next day. Her car was found parked neatly outside her old station. On the front seat, a cassette recorder with one final tape. It didn't contain his voice. It contained hers, screaming, then silence. She remains missing. No more calls have come. Some believe he died. Others think he's waiting for a new badge to retire, a new scanner to go quiet. Because to him, trust wasn't sacred, it was bait. He didn't chase strangers. He stalked connections, tracing the shadows of people who once wore the uniform. The emergency dispatcher turned the system inside out, using routine as a trap. But the next killer didn't need uniforms or false authority. All he needed was your name, a fake apology, and the right moment to say, "We need to talk." Because his voice didn't demand, it disarmed. And every victim who stayed on the line never made it to the end of the call. From 2011 to 2016, in a quiet stretch of Central Texas, 7 women disappeared under circumstances so subtle, so painfully mundane, that it took years for anyone to connect the pattern. They weren't strangers. They weren't hitchhikers or runaways. They were professionals, teachers, receptionists, medical assistants, all with steady lives, close friends, and recently severed relationships. What they shared was one thing. In the week before they vanished, each of them answered a phone call from a man they used to love. The words were different, but the voice was always the same. Calm, soft, remorseful. "I just wanted to say sorry. Can we talk?" And each of them said yes. Not because they trusted him, but because the pain was still there. The man identified himself in different ways. As a former boyfriend, fiancé, sometimes even an ex-husband. And in every case, he knew enough to convince them it was real. He referenced old details. The dog they buried, the apartment with the dripping faucet, the inside joke about peach yogurt. He'd cry on the line. He'd talk about therapy. He'd say he was dying or moving or getting married. And then he'd ask to meet, but not at their place, not in public, just somewhere quiet. To give you closure. Some declined. One told a friend she thought it was a prank. Another laughed and blocked the number. But 7 didn't. 7 agreed to meet, and 7 never came home. At first, police treated them as isolated missing persons. Each case had just enough difference to slip through the cracks. The second victim was listed as a possible runaway. The third was filed under domestic dispute. But it wasn't until victim number 4, 39-year-old Regina Salas, that someone noticed the link. Regina had been separated from her husband for years. She lived alone, taught art, and had no interest in reconciliation. Yet 3 days before she vanished, she told her sister she got a call from Paul, her high school ex, saying he wanted to give her something he owed her. "An apology," she said. It felt real. The problem: Paul died in 2008. The call came from a burner. When detectives pulled cell tower data, they found the signal bounced between 2 small towers near Lake Granger, an area mostly used for fishing, with thick woods and very little surveillance. That's when they found the first body. Partially buried beneath loose cedar, Regina had been strangled with fishing line, the kind sold at only one bait shop in a 60-mile radius. Her car had been moved to a rest stop. Her phone was missing. But the kicker? Her purse was untouched. No robbery, no assault, just the kill. When police revisited the other cases, they found similar oddities. Each woman's car was relocated after death. Each was missing only her phone and shoes. All had last answered a call or text from a new number, and all had previously ended toxic relationships. One woman's voicemail had recorded the man breathing, slowly, as if trying to hold back tears. The FBI built a profile: male, late 30s to early 50s, high emotional intelligence, socially manipulative, and potentially working in therapy or crisis response. He knew how to listen, how to twist grief into opportunity. He didn't stalk his victims in alleys, he stalked their memories. And through digital forensics, they found that some of the calls had been routed through Google Voice with IP addresses bouncing off university Wi-Fi systems. The killer was mobile, educated, and patient. Victim 6 had rejected the call initially, saying she wasn't ready. 2 weeks later, he called again. He said, "You deserve to be angry. I just want to be a better man." She agreed to meet. Her body was never recovered. By late 2016, the task force created to investigate the disappearances in Central Texas had one clear advantage: time. While the killer operated with patience, spacing his victims over months and even years, the team used that delay to analyze patterns, cross-reference call metadata, and reconstruct timelines down to the minute. But what chilled them most wasn't just how calculated the killer was, it was how he adapted. After victim 6, the killer began masking his voice using subtle pitch modulation, likely via call masking software. And instead of claiming to be an old boyfriend, he began referencing shared emotional events: the night we got caught in the rain, or the song that played during our last dance. His script wasn't rigid, it was responsive. One woman told a friend she got a call from someone claiming to be the guy who gave her the journal. Another said the voice knew the exact cabin her ex took her to in Arkansas 10 years earlier. These weren't details you could find online, they were private, which meant the killer was harvesting stories, likely using stolen phones or hacked photo metadata to piece together emotional puzzles. That theory was confirmed when investigators found a private Google Drive link embedded in a Craigslist message sent to a missing woman just days before her call. The drive contained voice notes, contact names, old emails, and a photo of the woman from 2009, one that had never been posted online. That's when police realized the killer wasn't just pretending to be the ex. He was building them, compiling voice samples, studying their speech rhythms, and mimicking their emotional cadence. He was rehearsing his victims' memories until he could speak them fluently. In December 2016, the killer made a mistake. He contacted a woman named Elise Ward, a paralegal who had ended a controlling relationship 5 years earlier. He introduced himself as her ex, using a new number, referencing a private moment they'd shared in Colorado. But Elise's ex had passed away, and unlike the others, she didn't respond emotionally. She contacted the police. With Elise's help, they traced the IP address to a coffee shop in Austin, but by the time agents arrived, the router had been unplugged and the account wiped clean. Still, something stuck. Investigators dug into network logs and discovered the device that sent the call had also briefly connected to a printer in the shop. On that printer, a half-printed page with a list of names, 7 names, all previous victims, and an 8th, Rebecca Hanley, a woman who had recently filed a restraining order against an old classmate for impersonation and harassment. She went missing 3 days later. That was the tipping point. Police released a digital alert through media channels warning against calls from unknown numbers claiming to be past partners. But the killer only grew bolder. He began calling landlines. He left voicemails reciting full paragraphs from love letters the women had received years ago. In one, he said, "I remember the green sweater you wore when you cried. I still see that look in your eyes. Can we talk again? Just once more?" That voicemail ended with a deep exhale. Police enhanced the audio and found, faintly in the background, the sound of a microwave beeping and a train whistle. Using that, they triangulated the likely neighborhood. They never found him. But they did find a storage unit containing an acoustic recording booth, dozens of labeled cassette tapes, 3 prepaid phones, and a burned-out laptop. Most chilling was a wall covered in handwritten phrases, mock conversations, emotional responses, apology templates. Each phrase was labeled with a woman's name and the approximate year of her breakup. "I should have stayed that night," read one. "You didn't deserve my silence," said another. There were no photos, no fingerprints, just memories, stolen, scripted, and weaponized. Authorities never released the killer's true identity. Some believe he's still out there, using new tech, refining his method. Others think he's moved on to email or AI-generated voices. But what they all agree on is this: he didn't kill women for revenge. He killed them for access. Because to him, closure wasn't kindness, it was camouflage. And the final words his victims heard were never shouted. They were whispered, like an apology rehearsed 100 times. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He faked it. The apologetic X used memories like scalpel blades, clean, precise, and invisible until too late. But the next killer, he didn't pretend to know you. He pretended to need you. One call, one panicked voice, a wrong number begging for help. And by the time the victim said, "It's okay, I'll stay on the line," they were already being hunted. It started as a whisper, a static-laced, trembling voice late at night saying, "Please, I think someone's following me." Then silence, then breathing. In North Carolina, between 2003 and 2010, 7 people received that call, all from different numbers, all at different times, but each began the same way: a wrong number, a scared voice, and the sound of terror bleeding through the receiver. Most of the victims were Good Samaritans, people with histories of community volunteering, charity work, or religious service. They were the kind who didn't hang up on a stranger in trouble, and that's what the killer counted on. He never used the same number twice. He borrowed payphones, hacked routers, rerouted Skype calls, and used temporary call forwarding services tied to burner phones. He disguised his voice, sometimes male, sometimes female, always desperate. The story varied just enough to seem real. "My car broke down, someone's chasing me," or "I'm locked in a building, please don't hang up." And when the person on the other end tried to help, that's when the manipulation began. The killer would guide them into engaging. "Can you just talk to me until I'm safe?" Or worse, "I need to come to you. I don't feel safe." In 2 cases, the victims agreed. They gave their address. In 4, they arranged to meet in public. One even offered to call the police, and the voice on the other end said, "No, no cops, please, just you." None of those 7 were ever seen alive again. What confused law enforcement at first was the total lack of connection. The victims didn't know each other. They didn't live near each other. Their ages ranged from 24 to 61. 3 were men, 4 were women. But what unified them wasn't who they were. It was how they responded to that one call. The first major break came with victim 4, a retired Navy nurse named Margaret Ellis. She had gone missing in 2007 after telling her son she was heading to the gas station to meet a girl who sounded in real trouble. Her car was found the next morning in a shopping plaza, locked, keys still inside, no sign of Margaret. But in the driver's side door panel, police found a receipt, time-stamped for 10 minutes before the call, showing she'd purchased a pay-as-you-go phone card. Why would a retired nurse need a burner card? That's when investigators traced her recent calls and found she'd made 4 outgoing attempts to the same unfamiliar number, all of which were dead ends. But one of them connected briefly to a landline registered to a now-abandoned house near Asheville. Detectives visited the home and found something chilling in the basement, an old rotary phone rigged to a digital recorder. On the tape were rehearsals, dozens of them, a man practicing phrases, "Help me," "Please stay on the line," "No cops," each recorded in different tones. But it wasn't just acting, it was scripting. In the margins of a nearby notebook were notes like, "Pause here for realism," or "Add sob at 022. The killer wasn't just luring, he was directing, rehearsing fear like a stage play. 2 more clues followed. Victim 6, a 35-year-old substitute teacher named Alan Greaves, had been on the phone for 17 minutes before disappearing. His wife said he left the house like a man on a mission, holding a notepad and a flashlight. His last words to her, "I'll be back in 10. Police later discovered a recording from his voicemail, a 6-second message with heavy breathing and a whisper saying, "He's right outside." But when they enhanced the audio, another sound became clear: church bells. Using that, they pinpointed the location to a specific town square in Boone, North Carolina, where a payphone had been removed only a week earlier. A local janitor remembered a man frequently using that booth, always around 11 p.m., always with a limp. He wore oversized headphones and a hoodie, even in summer. Police circulated sketches, no match. The killer was a ghost, but one who had built his entire method on empathy. That was his weapon. He didn't use a knife or a gun. He used your decency, your instinct to protect. And when the voice on the line begged for safety, the victims answered with their lives. The last known victim was Jenna Maris, a 29-year-old crisis line volunteer from Asheville, North Carolina. Someone trained to recognize deception, panic, and every shade of human pain. That's what made her perfect. The killer didn't want someone gullible. He wanted someone empathetic. Jenna had volunteered at the local suicide hotline for 6 years. She was known for her calm tone, her ability to talk people down from ledges, real or emotional. On November 3, 2010, she finished her shift just after midnight and walked into the parking lot with her phone already to her ear. CCTV caught her nodding slowly, pausing as if she were listening to someone describe something terrifying. She opened her car, got in, and drove away, never to be seen again. Her vehicle was found 2 towns over at a highway rest stop near a wooded area, keys still in the ignition, front seat reclined, a half-full bottle of water in the cup holder. Police opened her phone records and found that her final 23-minute call had been routed through a series of digital IP call masking services, first bouncing through Colorado, then back to Georgia, then to a deadline in Canada. But what stood out was the recording. Jenna, ever responsible, had set her phone to record incoming and outgoing calls for legal training purposes. The audio was intact, and when agents played it back, it sounded real, too real. The voice was male, shaking, whispering, "He's outside. He followed me from the bar. I think he has a knife." Then Jenna's voice, measured and calm, "Stay on the line with me. What's your name?" The caller hesitated, coughed, then said, "Leo." More details followed. A story about a man in a dark jacket, parked under a broken streetlight, staring into his window. Jenna kept him talking, but something was off. Investigators noticed the pauses were exact, almost rehearsed. They fed the audio through spectrogram software and uncovered evidence that the call had been a composite, not live, but stitched together from pre-recorded phrases. It had been built like a script. Every response had been triggered by long silences, made to sound reactive. The killer had used a digital sequencer to emulate real dialogue. Jenna never knew, because it wasn't just audio manipulation, it was emotional architecture, and it worked. In her notebook, found in the passenger seat, she had scribbled, "Leo, afraid, avoid cops, possible trauma." Below it, the words, "driving to him, just in case." Forensic teams tracked the last tower ping to a small neighborhood, but no one matching Leo's voice or story had ever lived there. Then a second breakthrough came. Investigators traced similarities in the audio to an obscure podcast that once aired prank calls using empathy traps. It had long been taken down, but the style, the pitch, the audio quality matched perfectly. The host's name, Charles Railing, a former theater sound technician who disappeared in 2001 after being investigated for stalking 3 women in Greensboro. In each case, they reported someone calling and pretending to be in danger. One said she found an envelope under her windshield that said, "Thanks for not hanging up." The case went cold, until now. But when police tracked Railing's last known address, the home had burned to the ground 6 months prior. Arson ruled undetermined. No body found. No neighbors recalled seeing him. Inside the ruins, investigators recovered a laptop, melted, but with a partially salvageable hard drive. Digital forensics teams spent weeks reconstructing it, and what they found chilled everyone. Dozens of audio folders, each labeled with names, cities, dates, all matched to known missing person cases. Each folder contained custom voice tracks, different accents, genders, emotional tones. In one labeled M. Ellis, they found 6 versions of a single plea. "I just need someone to stay on the line with me." He had recorded, edited, and rehearsed terror like a symphony. But the final folder was labeled End. Inside, one audio clip, 8 seconds long. A voice, presumably Railing's, speaking clearly. "They talk to me because they think I'm the victim, but I'm just the voice before they vanish." Then a laugh, then silence. Law enforcement believes Railing is still alive, possibly overseas, possibly still calling. Because after 2010, reports of strange, emotionally manipulative wrong number calls began appearing in Germany, then Portugal, then South Korea. In each case, a missing person followed. No links established yet, only the same pattern. A trembling voice, a single call, and then nothing. He didn't kill out of rage. He didn't hunt with blades or guns. He used speakers, silence, and the one thing that always answers in the dark, a good person trying to help. He didn't hang up. He waited until they said the words, "I'm here for you." And by then, it was already over. Some killers break in. These ones call first. They don't shout, they whisper, they don't chase, they invite. And when the call ends, you're already gone.